So this is not going to be like other communications trainings that you may have gone to, because it's not about learning the right words. It's not about learning the right formula. Um, Communicating with confidence, with clarity and connection is all about, well, what I like to call returning to yourself and leading from a place of authenticity and trust. So what will we be talking about today? One sec. Okay, what we're going to learn today, you're going to learn what armor is. You're going to learn how it shows up in your communication, because you might know what it is, but you might not be aware of all the sneaky ways that it shows up. You're going to learn how armor impacts trust and relationships, especially when it comes to communicating and trying to cultivate deeper relationships with people. And I'm also going to share some practical tools so you can move away from being guarded in your communication to a more unarmored and confident way of presenting yourself and communicating with other people. I would love if you would share in the chat, in one word, how would you describe your communication style when you are at your best? One word. If anybody would be open to share. Honest. Thank you, Rosemary. Direct. Professional. Anybody else? One word. Passionate. Thank you. All of those things are dead on. It's like when you're really grounded in your communication, it's almost like you go like, I nailed it. I felt good, right? Nothing felt forced. Let me just close the chat for a second. It's something that affects all of us as we go through our leadership journey. It doesn't matter if we're just starting out our first jobs or we're a seasoned executive in a company. Over time, we start to notice these things that nobody really speaks about or names, but I've decided to name it as armor. So let me talk to you about, oh, before I do this, oh, actually, we did this already. Apologies. Okay, what is armor? Right? What is armor? In simple terms, armor is the limiting beliefs, the protective behaviors, and ways of being that get in the way of us being our true selves in all situations. We learned these things from our parents, our families, business culture, our friends, society, old bosses, our current bosses. These are things that have worked for them. And so, whether we realize it or not, we end up taking these so-called truths, these ways of being, these beliefs, these protective behaviors, and we take them on as our own. And they become our own truths. But often over time, we find ourselves in situations and things don't feel quite right, and we're not quite sure what's going on. But we just know like we don't feel like ourselves. So, first of all, first thing on armor is the limiting beliefs. So, limiting beliefs are the things that we tell ourselves about our capabilities and our worth. Limiting beliefs create an internal dialogue that keep us striving for often unattainable goals while telling us we're never going to meet them. So, some limiting beliefs might be I have to be perfect all the time to be taken seriously, or I have to be a hard ass like my boss, or I'm not going to get the promotion, or I can't trust myself. I'm too impulsive. I have to ask other people what I should do. Or successful people always have all the answers. I can't say I don't know. That makes me look stupid. The second area is protective behaviors. So protective behaviors are the actions that we take to protect ourselves from potential criticism, judgment, or criticism, judgment, uncomfortable feelings, potential failure, or backlash. So protective behaviors might look like you avoid risks because you don't want to make mistakes, or you ruminate about all the things that could possibly go wrong instead of taking an action. Or you start, and this is for women in particular, you start downplaying your strengths because you don't want to come across as bragging. This happens a lot. Protective behaviors can limit your growth and the growth potential of people around you. So hopefully by the end of today, you'll be able to notice those protective behaviors and feel like you can move out of them and come from a place of empowerment. And the third area of armor is ways of being. So, ways of being is your general demeanor and how you show up in certain situations. So, some ways of being could be you have a facade of confidence. You tell yourself, I'm going to fake it until I make it. That's an energy. I can't stand that energy. Um, but that's an energy that a lot of people do, and it's forced, right? Another way of being is not sharing your opinion in a meeting when you really have something valuable to say, or acting in a way that aligns with somebody else's expectations, like being a hard ass, versus you who may want to lead with empathy. So these are the three different components of armor. Armor is something, all you have to remember, armor is something that you put on or you put up to protect yourself from being vulnerable, from feeling exposed, or feeling unsafe. So that could be the perfectly worded email that you agonized over every single word before you hit send. It's the hours that you spend over preparing for a presentation to make sure that the words that you choose are just right. Or it's the over rehearsing that you do to make sure that there's nothing left to chance, that you can be on automatic pilot and it'll ease your nerves. It's the time that you choose to stay silent in a meeting when your boss is asking for what ideas do people have? And you have an idea, but you're afraid that other people are going to judge you, so you don't speak at all. When you armor up, it limits your voice. It filters your authenticity. People don't know who you are. And it builds walls between you and the people that you're trying to lead or the people that you're trying to work with or have a deeper relationship with. So, how does armor show up in communication? When it comes to communication, armor can look like over explaining. That's when you're thinking, okay, I have to show how smart I am. I have to over explain everything so that I can cover every possible objection because you don't want to be seen as wrong or misunderstood. Another way armor shows up is that you withhold or stay silent instead of sharing to avoid judgment or criticism or backlash. Your boss doesn't like it when people challenge him. So instead of saying something, you stay silent. Softening your message. Softening your message means that after you have committed to speak, you have decided to speak in a way so that you're not seen as aggressive, bold, or too emotional. Women soften their message a lot. Number four, controlling the conversation. You go into a conversation and you think to yourself, I'm going to speak first, I'm going to set the tone, and I'm going to drive the direction of the dialogue. Often, when you are controlling the conversation, you don't want to give anybody else the opportunity to speak. You don't want them to bring up something that may be controversial or is going to make you uncomfortable. So you control every aspect of the conversation. Number five, over preparing. We see this a lot when you feel the need to control every word that comes out of your mouth, thinking that if I control every word that comes out of my mouth, I can control the outcome. So over preparing, we see that when we have to meet with our boss or we have to give a presentation. And then lastly, filtering your words. So filtering your words is something that you do before you speak. And often when we filter our words, we end up distilling down, not diluting is a better word for that, diluting the truth because we're filtering. So I'd love to know if you would put it in the chat, um, which one of these resonates with you the most? And it could be more than one. I've asked this poll before and I've had everybody pick all six. And so I'm curious if you could put in the chat, which one do you see yourself doing? Maybe not all the time, but sometimes. Staying silent. Thank you, Kristen. Anybody else? Over prepping and silence. Thank you, Rosemary. Over explaining, staying silent or filtering. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're not alone in doing this. And now that you know what armor looks like in communication, you have an opportunity to do something about it. So I want to share a brief story about a situation that I was in, and I thought it's a great example of the difference between showing up and being armored versus showing up and being unarmored around your communication. So a couple of years ago, I sat in on a senior leadership meeting. There were several dozen people in the room, and this company had just hired a new CEO. The other CEO, not a great guy, a lot of change, lot of problems in executing his vision. People were fired, very, very toxic. So this new guy comes in and he was sharing in a slide presentation, he had a vision for the company, how he saw, what he saw the company doing over the next 12 months. He was really polished. He had a great slide presentation. Clearly, somebody did it for him. He spoke eloquently. He was really measured. He had a ton of confidence. Um, and yet the room was completely disengaged. I was off to the side, so I got this great view of watching what this back and forth was like. People throughout his presentation, they were half paying attention, they nodded politely, but you could feel that the energy in the room, the energy between the audience and him, he wasn't connecting in any way, and his message wasn't landing. And it really felt like there was an invisible wall between him and the other people who were in the room. And after he finished his presentation, there was like this really like light, polite applause. And then there was this awkward silence. And I started to become kind of really uncomfortable because I thought, okay, what's he going to do now? And he did something that nobody expected. He took his jacket off. He put his jacket on the chair and he put his clicker down and he walked over to the stage. The stage was higher than the rest of the people in the room. And he sat on the edge of the stage and he put his hands on the stage and he leaned forward and he said something like, look, I really want to be open and honest with you. I know what it's like to have a leader who is screwing things up, who is highly toxic, and who doesn't know how to navigate change. I know what that feels like. And he said, I just want to be really honest with you. I promise you, I won't do that to you. We're partners in all of this. My door is always open, and I want to get to know everybody. I want to hear your thoughts all the time so that I can know what people are worried about and that so that we can move forward. In that moment, like it was almost like the energy sort of like lifted. There was like this sigh of relief. And that's the difference between armored communication, which was this polished, really slick, over-rehearsed presentation, and being open and honest and having communication that's really from the heart. And that's what we're going to talk about today. He was vulnerable. He really let people see who he was and see why his strategy was the right one and why he was really going for this. He didn't have any corporate jargon. He wasn't polished. It wasn't his slides. He was being himself. So people can sense armor even when they can't name it. So let me show you some of the hidden costs of when you're armoring up in communication. So it creates an emotional distance. It creates an emotional distance between you and the people around you, and it results in like surface level relationships, right? It's the person that you see every Monday, and it's like, "How was your weekend?" And you're like, "Oh, it was good. How was yours?" And that's it. There's no effort to go any deeper than that. Armor drains your energy and presence. Because when you're armored up, you are managing other people's perceptions of you. I don't know if you've ever been in the situation where you're presenting, let's say, or maybe you're giving an update in your team meeting, and you find yourself while you are communicating, while the words are coming out of your mouth, you are scanning the room to notice the body language of everybody. Are they paying attention? Do they like me? There's all of these things. And during that, you're not present. And that's really draining. You're exhausting. When you're armoring up, often afterwards, you just feel like you got to crash or collapse. It builds a culture of caution. People are cautious. They're not creative. We've all had those bosses that when you're walking around them, you feel really unsettled. You feel really cautious. That's armor. And lastly, it blocks authenticity. When people don't know the real you, they tend not to trust you. I was on a call last week with somebody who shared that I don't trust anybody who's too polished because I don't know who they really are. Nobody is polished like that in real life. So anytime you find yourself that you need to be perfect, you need to look like you have it all together, doesn't mean being prepared. It just means when you are pushing to make sure everything is perfect, there's a chance that people aren't going to trust you. And it's going to come across like, I don't know what it is about her, but. So armor blocks connection, right? And it blocks your ability to communicate in a really powerful and confident way. The truth is, people trust presence. So the more you can be present, the more you can be yourself. The person who leads with communication is confidence in their communication, even when it feels risky, like the CEO I talked about. That's a leader who's really willing to make an effort to connect with other people through their communication. So I want you to take a moment right now and to just think for a second. Where does your armor show up in your communication? Does it show up when you're presenting to your boss or to leadership? Does it show up when you have to give constructive or negative feedback to someone? Does it come up when you feel like you have to protect yourself because I'm in conflict, even if it's healthy conflict with somebody? Is it when you're coaching your team through uncertainty and you're not quite sure what the right steps are, or you're asked to speak publicly, or even something else? Just notice it for a second. You don't need to put it in the chat. Because once you can see where you're armoring up, you can start to choose differently. You have your power back. Okay. I want to dive a little bit deeper into this so you can see the full picture, and then we're going to dive into communication specifically. So to help my clients understand how they're armoring up, understand how much armor that they're wearing, and to walk them through the process of dismantling their armor, I created this coaching model. And so I'm going to refer to it as we're going through the rest of the webinar, and it'll hopefully be useful for you here. So as I go through the model, remember, there are 4 archetypes. These archetypes are not labels for you. They're simply a way of noticing, oh yeah, I do that thing, because you can't change what you don't acknowledge. So every archetype, there are 4 of them. They have strengths. They have shadow patterns where they're armoring up or they're limiting themselves. And each one, when you see how they move through the model, there's a roadmap for being more clear, being more present, and being more confident and building more connection. So on the one side of the spectrum, we have the knight. Everyone knows somebody who's a knight. A knight is fully armored, right? I've worked for several bosses who are knights. On the good side, good things about the knight, they're loyal. They often say, we're going to battle. They're decisive. They usually fiercely protect their team, and they get results. But knights don't know they're wearing armor. They don't know that they're constantly trying to protect themselves. They're often like oblivious to that. Other people can see it, but they can't. They're fixed in their thinking and their behaviors. They're often defensive, they're controlling, they do not trust other people. They don't do vulnerability. They see that as a weakness. They're always on edge. They often give off a negative or unsettled energy. You're working with a knight when you feel like you got to walk on eggshells anytime you're around them. They double down when faced with new ways of thinking. It's like, no, we're doing it this way. I've always done it this way. They love the status quo. Um, they often play the victim and they will lead through intimidation. So, from a communication perspective, when they armor up, knights look to control the narrative. They may dominate the discussions because they don't want to expose themselves to any questions they might not know the answer to. And they don't want to deal with any uncertainty, right? Knights who are extroverted, right? They often are combative. They use abrasive and combative language. If a knight is more introverted, they are often very quiet. They avoid eye contact and interaction, which if a knight is leading a team and they're an introvert, there's very little engagement, there's very little communication. And even though they get results often, usually a team is highly dysfunctional when it's being led by a knight. The second archetype is the fencer. So fencers are just starting to recognize their armor. They're noticing things aren't serving them like they used to be. The fencer is strategic, they're resourceful, they're highly skilled at anticipating any challenges that are coming down the pike. They're mostly armored, they're guarded, and they can get defensive sometimes. Although they're afraid of change, fencers know that in order to move up the ladder, in order to get selected to lead that project or be a part of that new thing that's going on, they have to get out of their comfort zone. Um, and they have to let down their guard. Fencers are cautious about opening up to other people about this. And when they're looking to grow, fencers will often take 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. When they feel threatened, they will totally retreat and go back to the behaviors that may be uncomfortable for them, but it's the discomfort they know versus the discomfort of not knowing what it would be if I was to stop over explaining, for instance, and expose themselves. So when it comes to communication, fencers can be defensive in their communication or closed off. Like you ask them a question, they'll answer yes or no, or they like asking closed questions. Um, Fencers may hold back their ideas, they may filter their words, or engage only when it feels safe. Usually, fencers are more comfortable in a one-on-one situation than with a group. They think to themselves, hey, it's smarter that I'm guarded instead of risking any potential judgment or not being liked by others. You then have the wrestler. Okay, wrestlers have a learner's mindset. They're emotionally intelligent, they're self-reflective, they're deeply attuned to nuance. They recognize when they could lean in and show up in a different way. They're comfortable with vulnerability and they're trusted by others. Wrestlers are open to new ways of thinking. Unlike the knight that's like status quo, that's what we're going to do. Wrestlers understand that the only constant is change and they have to learn to adapt to that. Um, they're aware of their armor, they're aware of some of the patterns, but I called them the wrestler because they wrestle with letting it go. In those moments, they're like, I could be more comfortable if I just don't share, versus I know that by sharing my creative ideas, I know it'll be valuable to everybody in the room or it'll start the conversation. So that's the wrestler. They're clear on who they want to be and who they want to embody, but sometimes their behaviors don't align with their values, right? Again, that's that wrestling energy. Wrestlers will ask for help. Usually fencers don't. Wrestlers will ask for help and are more comfortable doing vulnerability and really sharing to build trust. When it comes to communication, if they feel unsafe, if they feel like, oh my God, this is a very high stakes pressure situation, wrestlers can get stuck in a loop of overthinking and not taking action, especially when they have to give ideas, when they have to share feedback. Um, Sometimes they can second guess every word, right? If they feel like it's an unsafe situation and everybody is going around, like in a weekly meeting where you're giving your boss and your team updates, as they're listening to other people talk, they're writing down the exact words they're going to say because they fear being judged. Okay, that's wrestlers. Sometimes also wrestlers can use apologetic language, right? I'm so sorry for being late, or I don't mean to interrupt, but, right? So apologetic, lower energy words, not often, but sometimes. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have the martial artist, right? Martial artists, they have a growth mindset. They are unarmored most of the time. They intentionally challenge the status quo. They see opportunities all around them. They seek growth experiences. They know who they are. They lead with their values. They're constantly making sure that the behaviors align with their values. Um, you know you are around a martial artist because you feel good about you when you're around them, right? That is a key thing. There's something about a martial artist. They have this very grounded energy. They're wise. They're typically unarmored most of the time. They can be agile. But when it comes to communication, sometimes when a martial artist feels like they're at a stressful situation, high pressure situation, or feel emotionally threatened, they can react defensively sometimes from a communication perspective. You know, sometimes you can have a boss who's a martial artist, very grounded all the time, really chill, very comfortable, but then out of the blue, there's just this emotional outburst, right? That's something from the communication perspective, that's something that a martial artist can do. So you might see yourself in one of these, maybe in a couple of these archetypes. And you might notice that in different environments, a different archetype comes out. So I'm curious, when you think about the coaching model and you think about your communication, um, which archetype resonates most with you? If you feel comfortable, put it in the chat. Are you a knight? Are you a wrestler? Are you somebody who's a martial artist? You genuinely chill, but sometimes you can have an emotional reaction. Maybe you're the fencer. So as we go through, think about, where do you fall? Okay. Now that you're noticing how to start to recognize your armor and how it impacts your presence and your communication, I want to talk about some small practical tips that you can start to use to communicate more with more clarity, confidence, and connection. Okay. You don't have to be fearless when you communicate. That's not what unarmored means. You want to be able to show up with confidence and practice these things that I'm going to share with you now, these three shifts over and over again. And that is what's going to allow you to communicate with confidence, clarity, and build more connection with people. So the first shift is you have to notice and name your pattern. You can't change what you don't acknowledge. So the earlier you spot your pattern in terms of communication, the moment you find yourself filtering, the moment you start obsessing over every word in that email before you hit send, the moment you start over explaining, the moment you start carefully writing down every word you're going to say before it's your turn to speak, that's the moment that you have the power to choose differently. You have to get in front of the pattern. You have to notice it and go, look at that, there it is. When you're able to do that, you get to choose differently. So think about it as catching yourself before you go down the pattern that is automatic for you. So it might be silently saying, oh, look, There's my night energy, trying to control the conversation. What's coming up for me? What am I afraid of? Why do I want to protect myself? Or there's my wrestler, over explaining all of the things, right? Once you notice the armoring up behavior, that's the moment where you have the power to choose differently. The second shift, after you notice the behavior, I want you to take a deep breath. I know it sounds cheesy, but taking a really deep breath, you wouldn't believe how much space is created in the few seconds of that breath to be able to pause. So when you feel triggered to over explain, to filter your words, to over prepare, take a breath. Okay. It gives you the space to remind you that you have options and that you don't have to default to the pattern that you've always done. So you can pause to be present instead. You can start to notice, wait a second, is my heart rate really that high? Is my throat starting to close? Sometimes that happens, like your throat feels really tight or your heart starts pounding when all of a sudden you have to present or somebody asks an unexpected question. Breathe into it. There's a lot of information in that moment. And then the third thing is lead with curiosity instead of certainty. Armor shows up in certainty, and it usually shows up with three words. In this moment, oh my God, I need to. I need to control the outcome. I need to craft my answer right now. I need to make sure that every word in this email, I'm 100% sure that nobody can question me on it. I need to over prepare and rehearse this to death so that I can go in and I can just have it be on automatic pilot. And that's going to make me look polished and look like I know the thing. The moment you say, I need to, it's control, right? Control, you're protecting yourself. So connection doesn't grow when you're trying to protect yourself, right? It's that wall I was talking about earlier. It grows from being curious. So instead of going into a meeting and saying to people, here's what I think we should do, you can instead say, what are you seeing in this situation that I might be missing? Or what feels most important for us to get clear on before we move forward, right? Curiosity, when you're curious with your colleagues, it invites collaboration. It signals trust, right? You don't have to have all the answers. It doesn't matter what role you have. And it's when you're curious, that's unarmored leadership in action. So these three shifts, they're not big, they're not flashy. Like I said at the beginning of the webinar, that this was not going to be in like another communications training with the tools and the formula. I'll give you some books at the end that I recommend that will teach you the skills. But I always share that I've had people come in looking for skills, communication skills. I want to present better. I want to have more presence. I want to not trip over my words. And what I've learned from this is that I can teach you all those things. But if you, at a very deep level, don't believe that what you have to say is of value, it doesn't matter what formula I share with you. You're not going to be able to use that to your highest potential because you've got that thing underneath going on to protect you from being out in front and communicating from a more confident place. So far, we've talked about how armor shows up in communication. We've explored our patterns in the small ways, but I want to show you what this looks like in action. So I want to share two real life examples, and hopefully these resonate with you. So last year I worked with a leader. I'm going to call him James. James was brought in to lead this large cross-functional team project. He had the spotlight on him. It was a huge make or break project that the CEO personally asked him to lead. James is wicked smart. He's creative, he's innovative, he's very task oriented, but yet he's a strategic thinker. But his communication strategy, it really sucked, to be honest with you. He was really struggling. Anytime he had to give like a weekly update to his team or to present what the progress was got, how, how things were moving forward to the stakeholders, he would spend so much of his time over explaining all of the things that could potentially happen. Well, if we go down this path, this is this. If we do this, this is this. And he found himself over preparing and over explaining. And when we met, I asked him, how are people responding? And he's like, it's like deer in the headlights. He said, I can feel that people are disengaging from me, and I really need these people to know what the status is. Him over explaining was really eroding the trust, even that the CEO had in him. So when we dove a little deeper into his over explaining and over preparing, he was doing this to protect himself from criticism, from judgment, and from what he called being exposed. He said when he was in college, he was in a room with a bunch of people and he was doing like a team presentation, like one of those like senior project things. And the professor asked him a question and he did not know the answer. And he just felt like, okay, I'm blowing this for everybody. And we realized, and we started to unpack that, like this was one of the things that was driving his need to be able to explain everything, to be ready for any question that comes his way. So what we decided to do is that he didn't need to prove that he was in this role. He was asked to be in this role. He's smart enough to be in this role. He needed to have more trust in himself and how he was showing up. So we started to practice some shifts, right? He would identify what his core message was first. What were the three things that people needed to know when he was presenting? That's it. No caveats, no background, no nothing, just three things. He would start with the why he was doing it and the what he was doing. He wouldn't get into the how unless people asked him about it. And then he would pause after he shared his key points instead of filling the silence. That was one of the things. Even if it was more than a couple of seconds, he felt this constant need to fill that silence. He wasn't comfortable in letting people reflect on what he shared. Within a few weeks, the dynamic shifted in these meetings, right? People started to trust him again. As he said, he goes, I felt more grounded. I felt more confident. I felt like I could be present because I wasn't worried about all of this other noise that was happening around me and in my head. So that's one example. That's James. The second example is a woman named Elena. She was a rising star at a nonprofit of all places. She was smart. She was a strategic thinker. She was well liked by her peers and others. As she was moving up in this nonprofit organization, she was really struggling with her communication, particularly in two ways. The first was she was avoiding feedback. The thought of sharing feedback, whether it was constructive, negative, even positive, she really struggled with that. And she was hiding behind being very polished and using corporate jargon. She'd started in investment banking early on in her career, and then she moved over to this nonprofit. So anytime there was tension, anytime there was misalignment in the group, anytime there was something that wasn't quite right, she would she would say things like, she'd say, let's circle back. Drives me nuts. Let's circle back on that next week, right? Or she'd say, we need to socialize the message across all of our stakeholder groups. At first, that felt safe to her. It's corporate speak. People understand what it is. She didn't have to get down in the weeds and be vulnerable. And I really acknowledge what was happening in the moment anytime she felt that tension. But over time, by staying and speaking in that way and not really being herself, instead hiding behind that corporate jargon, some things started to fall apart. Her team started to miss deadlines. Um, uh, the project started to stall. There were a lot of misunderstandings that came out of some of the meetings because some issues weren't resolved. And it was starting to erode trust on her team. And she was in a panic by the time we worked together. So to help her begin to rebuild trust on our team, one of the things I did around her communication was I told her that she needed to communicate in a plain, simple way. No more corporate jargon. She was to be kind, she was to be clear, and she was to be direct, right? So this scared the hell out of her because she was able to hide behind circling back. But what she was able to do was by leaning in and just changing the way she spoke. She would say things like, I'm noticing that people are hesitating around this idea. What's coming up for everybody? I sense this hesitation. She would also say things like, it sounds like we're not all in agreement. I want to work through this together. Let's take some time to really unpack that. Or she would say, I'm sensing that there's tension in the room. I really want to talk more about this. Over time, her being more real, right? In the beginning, she would say her heart would race, but she would notice that the more she was just herself, the easier it was for her to communicate in a confident way. There was no glossy thing. There was no, I got to pick the right word. She was showing up like that CEO I talked about earlier, showing up as the real person. People began to trust Elena. And because she was modeling being herself, everybody else started to let their guard down. And it was very effective. Trust started to rebuild back on the team. So before I wrap up, I want to leave you with a few final reflections. Like I said before, today wasn't about adding more strategies to your toolkit, right? It was about remembering something that you already know. It's about reconnecting, returning to yourself, the person who you are underneath all of the beliefs that people have told you, the behaviors that they have modeled for you, and the ways of being that they have showed you. It's remembering who you are and then communicating, first connecting to, and then communicating from that place. When you're able to do that, there is incredible freedom because you're not worrying about anybody else. You're the same person in every room. And when you're willing to return to yourself, connect to that person, you realize that your real voice is enough. Your real presence, who you are in every room is enough. You don't have to be polished to be powerful. You don't have to rely on corporate jargon, slick slides. You don't have to rely on any of that. Your communication doesn't have to be flawless. You just have to be real, right? You have to be present. And the work is something that's ongoing. It's in small shifts. It's a practice that you continually repeat. Because, like I said before, when you're able to notice something, how you're showing up when you want to communicate, when you're able to notice it and name it, you have a choice. You can create a new pattern for yourself. So every conversation is an opportunity to notice when you're armoring up, to pause instead of protecting yourself, and to get curious about what's happening with you, as well as notice when you start to change how you're communicating, how other people are receiving you, and what changes in terms of energy and relationships and impact. So here's my invitation to you. Pick one moment this week and ask yourself, where can I release a little bit of armor? Where can I lean, where can I lean in a little bit? Where can I choose to be more present over perfection? It could be a meeting that you're having with your boss later this week. It could be you're going to be part of a group conversation. You're doing this cross-collaborative project. And instead, you're going to lean in. You're going to ask more questions. You're going to put yourself out there. You're going to share an idea when it comes up. when it doesn't feel safe and you feel like, what do I have to say? Nobody cares. I don't have value in this conversation. I'm just a junior person. Being willing to raise your hand. That is one small thing that you can do where you're choosing being present over being perfect. So you just have to practice. As I wrap up today, and I know that we're almost at time, remember, unarmored leadership isn't about being fearless. It's showing up even when you're afraid. And it's about practicing. You don't have to dismantle your armor overnight. You just have to commit to saying, I want to find out who I am. I want to show that person to the world. And then as you do that, things become easier and lighter for you. So let me